Good morning and welcome to the Lightcast Studios for this employment situation live analysis. MZ Burning Glass is now Lightcast. We're looking at the jobs report, a U.S. Department of Labor report where it looks at the health of our economy and also signals to other parts of our economy and the health of what's happening today. On this August 5th, 2022, I'm your host, Christopher Laney, and I am joined by two of our top economists, senior labor economist Ron Hetrick and Rusha Van Kudre. Ron, Rusha, welcome to the studio.
Good morning.
It's good to have you. Ron, I'm going to start with you. Over the last couple of months, this report seems to be highly anticipated. Everybody's looking at this to see if it's given us any signals towards a potential recession. I want to just start with you. What are your initial thoughts?
Yeah, I find it to be almost a completely odd report. You have a fantastic payroll survey number, exceeded a lot of people's expectations. We've been really hoping and wanting for a number greater than 500,000 to hit us, and we finally got that. It's across the board. There's a lot of industries that you wanted to see be able to hire workers that were able to hire them. And then you see this really disturbing trend in the household survey where they follow up a month with a labor force decline with another labor force decline, and also labor force participation falling a little bit. So it's just a kind of an odd report to take in.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Rusha, I'm going to jump back to Ron and talk a little bit more about labor force participation. But before I do, unemployment, specifically this unemployment rate, did it go up? Did it go down? What does this mean for our economy and for employers?
So it's edged down a little bit to 3.5%, and we're at about 5.7 unemployed workers at this point. And so I think sort of with the worries everyone's been talking about, I was very pleased to see this job numbers up by so much, along with the unemployment rate staying nice and low, right? I mean, sort of when we worry about a recession, that's the first thing we look at, and so I think this is a really good sign at the moment for the labor market.
Ron, we've been beating the drum over the challenges facing labor force participation. And you and I were just talking about this a few minutes ago. Your thoughts on what is happening when it comes to just people leaving the labor force?
Yeah, I'm really trying to get in and figure out where is this coming from. I actually looked at several different populations, the population over 55, kind of that prime age population, and then that younger population. And if you look at the labor force changes, I mean, you kind of see a little bit of an uptick in that over 55. You see a bit of an uptake in the prime age, but yet you see kind of a drop in the lower age population, and specifically saw a fairly significant drop for 16 to 19-year-olds. So, you have the middle of the summer, it's July, and you're thinking, certainly the expectations are a lot of teenagers are going to be looking for work, but it doesn't appear that that was really the case. But each month it seems to send us a different signal. Who's out? Why are they out? And for, something that really doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but something that blows me away is that our number of people out of the labor force is over 100 million right now. Well, guess what? Last July, in July of 21, it was also a little over 100 million. So to think that after a year that we're not making progress against that is a little bit discouraging.
Rusha, there were some positive signs in certain industries. Can we talk about the numbers in those industries and what does this mean for our economy?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we saw big gains in accommodation and food services with about 74,000 jobs added. Professional and business services had 89,000. And then, I think it's interesting because the changes were really spread. It was like a pretty good gain over many different industries. And so I think that's a good sign overall, particularly in the summer where we sometimes see a little bit more seasonality.
Ron, just any thoughts there? Anything you would like to add?
Actually, I think that pretty much hits it. Yeah, I really wouldn't have anything more to add on it.
Regarding specifically the construction industry, I know you and I were talking a little bit more about the construction industry, and there were some gains there.
Yeah, I do want to talk about. So I talk a lot about construction online. If anybody follows me on LinkedIn, I really am been fascinated by this industry for years, even going into the housing crash back in 07 to 09. And you're looking at a situation now where we have a really, really low inventory of homes for sale. And so we're sitting there going, part of the problem was people were saying, well, there's shortages of goods, like we can't get the goods to build the homes. And there's absolutely been a shortage of workers. So it's keeping builders from building, more affordable homes, because when they can build, they build higher end homes because they need that return for the small workforce that they have. So when you look at something like this month, there's a seasonal expectation of a gain of hiring, and construction beat that gain pretty soundly. And they did it in residential and non-residential. So I think that's actually a very encouraging sign if we're starting to look at, housing starts. We want those to go up. If we want more homes on the market to help combat the price inflation that we've seen, this is where it starts. It starts by getting these workers and getting these homes being built.
Rusha, looking at wages, growth, same, was there a decline? And what did that look like by industry?
Sure. So wages went up about 15 cents. Always a little bit cautious about talking about them because, clearly these are not real wages. And so inflation is still happening and there's all of that. But we have seen, increases across the board. I think some pretty sizable increases relatively, at least in the places where we were hoping. So sort of retail trade, some of the accommodation and food services, there actually has been sort of a higher uptick than we had been seeing in previous months, at least.
So Ron, when we were looking at lower unemployment, lower labor force participation, higher wages, you predicted in the demographic drought report that there was going to be a tightened, workforce. Is this what you predicted? Is this the new normal? What is happening?
Man, when we wrote that report, we were thinking out in the future. We were really looking at, hey, the next 20, 30 years, things are really going to start to change. Certainly in the 2030s, when we have more older people than we have younger people for the first time in history. To see this hitting us now, and what concerns me so much is I keep saying, like, you look at a normal economy, it goes up and it goes down. There's recessions, there's recoveries. And we're looking at the sizable labor force drop that we had after, post-pandemic, when a lot of people dropped out. If you would have told me, like, you're years into this and we're not picking up, like, we're literally losing momentum. So as much as, last year I would have said, absolutely not. This is not a new normal. It's way too early. I'm now starting to look at this and go, I just can't see how we get back. Let's remember something really important here, okay? Our labor force right now is still over 600,000 smaller than it was in February of 2020. Yet our population's been growing this whole time. We're getting close to needing about 3.5 to 4 million workers just to getting back the number of people that we had prior to kind of service the population that we have, because we have so many more consumers and we're not making it. We don't have as many producers for those consumers. So, as we deal with this whole concept of a recession, in this past month, we saw labor openings, job openings drop from 11.3 to 10.7. And people are like, well, here we go. Here comes a recession. It's like, I think we're losing perspective. Prior to COVID, we had 7 million job openings, and that was considered outrageous. And we're still at 10.7 now. So we're still in outrageous demand levels. So the desire of employers to hire workers is absolutely still so strong, even with all of these negative economic headwinds coming at us.
But do you have thoughts on, so right now in the media, nearly every day we're hearing of big companies either slowing in hiring or layoffs. We're hearing a lot more about layoffs. And It feels like we're signaling okay, maybe layoffs have been happening, but now we're going to report it because of what's happening in our economy. Is that, what are your thoughts on that?
Look, if you look at this number right now for July, the number of people who are unemployed because they were laid off actually went down. For everybody who lays off, for every, so Amazon had a fairly large layoff. There are so many employers waiting for those employees because, some of these employers came into town and hired so many of these workers away. And now this is a chance for some of these companies to get these people back. Mom and pop shops are still the ones struggling the most because they couldn't, match the wage inflation that was occurring in all of these other, larger companies. So if things start to weaken, especially for big box companies, then it's certainly going to benefit, the other people in those markets, hopefully, if these people choose to remain in the labor force.
So, and I would also say that, when we actually, right, so you hear about in the media all the time, right, these huge layoffs are happening. And, granted that the JOLTS numbers definitely they're lagged a little bit, but we are not seeing, for the most part, increases in layoffs at all. And so I think it's one of those cases where, as Ron was saying, there's a few companies that maybe overhired, really sort of built up their labor force because they had the money. And so now maybe they're cutting back to the regular levels, but that doesn't necessarily signal anything for the labor force as a whole, or even the entire industry as a whole, right? Like, it means that maybe there's a shift happening a little bit, but that doesn't really say anything about everywhere else. And I think it's sort of important to keep that in mind when you look at the numbers versus what you're hearing in the news every day.
One of the things I noticed earlier this week, I think I mentioned it during our JOLTS analysis, was the fact that in the tech industry, which is where a lot of these layoffs have been announced, the job postings are higher in the second quarter than they were in the first quarter. So people are still hiring.
Yeah, I want to talk about that because this is something, I think we've mentioned it in prior months, but I'm going to keep hammering this for anybody who hasn't heard us talk about this. You have to understand these tech industries are hiring tons and tons of IT workers. These jobs are very attractive to IT workers. Meanwhile, you have banks, you have manufacturing companies, you have all of these non-tech companies who've had a lot of IT job openings, and those openings are soaring because they need people, and they've lost a lot of people to the tech industry. So as these larger big name tech companies lay off people, man, there's tons of opportunities for them in so many other industries. It's still going to be about convincing people that those industries are attractive opportunities for them to grow their careers.
I mean, I think another interesting point too is that, I think in many cases, Silicon Valley sort of moved to remote work a little bit sooner, right? In terms of announcing early on, they're going to let everyone be remote. And so that probably brought a lot of people in too. As I think we sort of get to a point where this is becoming more acceptable in other industries, I think those industries are going to have a shot to get some of those workers back as people realize that, there are many places to work that really could be a great place at this particular moment.
Rusha, that's a good point. Rusha, your final takeaways, top takeaways in this report.
I mean, I think this just really continues to be a sign that there is sort of a disconnect between what we're seeing in sort of what we think of as the larger economy versus the labor market, right? Like we keep seeing, there's lots of mention about, we had our last GDP numbers, which came down a little bit, and there was a lot of worry over that. And I think we just keep seeing the opposite signals, right? In the labor market, hirings are still very high. Quits are still, at pretty high levels. Layoffs are not coming up the way people expected. And this jobs number was really huge. So, I mean, I think it really just points out like what a unique time we're in right now. And that predictions are going to be hard to make because this is not the way we've seen things go before.
Ron, before I get to your final thought, we did have a question on the LinkedIn board, which was, how seasonal is what's happening right now with students going back to school?
Yeah, I think, when you're talking about a core month like July, seasonal factors are really not going to make a big difference. Obviously things keep evolving, schools keep going back earlier, but we're not going to see that effect in July. So when we start to see this drop, unless we just are seeing a massive surge in people going to summer school. And by the way, enrollment numbers have been trending down. So I don't know if we're necessarily seeing that part either. I think we would more expect a seasonal effect or any kind of weird seasonal thing. Like when did the survey week fall? That would be more for August, but certainly not for a core summer month like July.
So Ron, your final thoughts, and one thing that we've been continuously looking at is this the soft landing that the Fed has been looking for?
Well, we certainly needed a way to get all of this money out of the economy. And I think, I believe that they are seeing the effects that they want. I think, we still have a lot of housing demand. However, you are seeing prices starting to go down some markets. That's a sign. Like you have to look at certain industries to kind of get a key for what other industries are going to do. And we are starting to see this effect. We did see this week the report that came out about, soaring credit card debt and things like that. All of these actions are things that could potentially limit future spending. And we really needed that to cool off because of that enormous run up that we had in the past year or so, especially in durable goods. So I think this is going to be about the most pleasant way to go through a recession. But, I want to kind of speak to Rusha's point because it's just so important. Everybody's paradigms are being blown up. I see economists looking at things that happened in the past and trying to say that that's going to happen now. But you have to understand our dynamics right now are so incredibly different from anything we've ever experienced. Like I said, workers are still starving to get employees. They were never able to hire them when they had so much demand. And so people are now going, oh, you're in a recession, lay people off. And they're like, we don't have anybody to lay off. I couldn't even find the people when I was hiring. And so this is different. We've never had this before. So I think everybody needs to keep an open mind about things could look very, very different this time around. And I absolutely believe this is not going to be the kind of pain that we usually associate with a recession, historically speaking.
So the line that you used last month still resonates. You can't lay off the people that you don't have.
Lay off what you don't have.
Ron, Rusha, this was a great conversation. Thank you for your live analysis. Once again, if you would like a full analysis, please visit us at lightcast.io. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you again next month.